What's up, grinders? Welcome back to the channel. So today's video is going to be a little bit of an interesting one, potentially controversial one. I'm going to be talking about both the benefits and negatives and in what situations I think you should possibly try out ALG as a method for learning languages. That is the automatic language growth method, and what instances it's probably a bad idea, okay? Now, I'm going to be doing a comparison between traditional learning methods versus this method over here called the automatic language growth method, based on my experiences, because I have learnt languages with different methods. Now, I've learned Esperanto to a C1 level, fluency, using traditional methods, basically books, websites, stuff like that, before I started to actually listen and interact with the language, because there was not a lot of audio content available when I was learning, although there is quite a bit now. Now, I am at an intermediate level in Mandarin Chinese, and I have basically used a mixed approach of a lot of input, so me watching a lot of content at a comprehensible level, as well alongside, traditional study. So that could be either me doing grammar study, word study, sentence mining, decks, flashcards, all this good stuff, apps, whatever, okay. So that is a mixed method that I've used there. And then for Spanish, I've used a method called ALG, automatic language growth, which is basically you sit down from day one and you start watching content in the language, and that is all you do, okay? Now, obviously, the content you watch from the very beginning has to be very, very simple. A person sits there, points at an apple and says, "This is an apple," and then points at something else and goes, "That is an orange." And then your brain works out the language slowly over time, and then the level of complexity increases. Now, I want to make a video on this topic because I saw two comments that I thought were very interesting, and maybe I can shed some interesting insight as someone who has learnt by both methods, okay? Or I guess by various methods. So the comment goes like this. And this was on my Spanish update where I dropped 550 hours of following the ALG method. At this point, it should be obvious enough that this shit works. Saying otherwise would be just denying the reality. Looking forward to see the progress. So obviously this is someone who has been watching this, sees me watching dubbed content now in Spanish, which means clearly I've got a pretty good understanding of the language. And they're like, well, fuck it, this obviously works. Like, look at this dude. After 550 hours, he's watching Spanish content. Mind you, that is 550 hours. Now, this comment here says, nah, he's getting to the point where he can't keep guessing what's being said with accuracy. It only appears to work in the beginning stages because it's easier to guess what a sentence means. Now, I understand where this person's coming from because, prior to learning via this method, the ALG method, I had my ideas about how it would work, but now being 550 hours in, I can tell you how it works, okay? So obviously, the language I'm learning using this method is Spanish. Now, Spanish has a massive amount of cognates with English. It also has a massive amount of cognates with Esperanto. In fact, probably more, which is another language that I speak, okay? So as I start watching the most beginner of content in this language, straight up, I'm going to start recognizing words that match or have very similar meaning to English. Now, obviously, there's false friends that exist, okay? And that will throw you off for a little bit, but they're the minority. The vast majority of cognates I'm going to recognize and go, okay, well, that just means what it does in English, or that just means what it does in Esperanto, okay? So that is the first potent part of the method. You start hearing these words and you're like, okay, I know what that means. Like, I don't know what the rest of it means, but I know what that means, okay? Now, as you start picking up also these most simple words, because obviously if they keep pointing at the same thing over and over and using the word for it, even if you don't have a cognate for that, you're going to recognize that word. Now, you mix the power of cognates with the power of, just pointing at things and recognizing your brain making the necessary connections. You put two and two together, and eventually your brain goes, oh, okay, well, I see that they generally slot something in between these two, so I'm just going to accept that that means probably something like this. Now, this is not a conscious thing. You're not thinking about this, but like it is happening, okay? And every now and then you will just have a moment where you're like, oh, okay, well, that just means maybe. Okay, like I've heard that hundreds of times, but now suddenly my brain just recognizes that means maybe, okay? Now, that will happen, but it won't happen for every single word. Sometimes there's just like those impactful moments where you're like, oh, okay, well, that's what that means. Now, with a traditional method, yeah, you're going to see cognates, but they really don't make any difference compared to any other word. Maybe they help you a tiny bit, okay? But when you're looking at a word written down, when you're learning it, okay, because that's normally how you start picking up words first, you see them written. You might go, okay, well, that's a cognate, that one's not, but I see them written down. So when you learn that word, generally what will happen is you will hear the word, and you'll recognize it instantly in full with that word. Now, you will either recognize it instantly in full or you won't recognize it at all. Now, with ALG, what will happen is things will start to come into focus over time. You may even be hearing a cognate that if you see written down, you will know instantly what it means, but because it sounds different in the language, your brain has not made those connections, okay? Now, there will be other ones which obviously they sound like what they do in English, but they're written completely different. But the point being here is like things will slowly come into focus. So my Chinese experience versus my Spanish experience. In Chinese, I'm probably at a slightly more higher level when it comes to comprehension of the language. However, I would say in Spanish, I'm probably going to outpace my Chinese quite quickly because I'm now at the point where a lot of the words I'm picking up are cognates, okay? Scientific cognates, you know, technical words, all the types of international words. I've gotten past the basics of the language, which is generally where it's different to, say, English or Esperanto in a lot of ways. You know, those old words, those words that have been around in the language since the language was born, okay? I'm now at the more complex, scientific, international type words, which is where it becomes easier and easier. Now, with Chinese, when I'm watching content, it's like I either recognize it in full or I don't recognize it at all, okay? So it's like everything's clear or nothing's clear at all. It's just gibberish. Now, with Spanish, it's like things are floating in and out. I may actually recognize part of a word and not recognize the other half, which is interesting in a lot of ways because it's like you're almost picking up sound groupings as opposed to words. A good example is the word talvez. Well, it's not a word. I found that out by when I saw someone typing in my Discord that it's actually two words, but I thought it was one word. At least I think it is. I may be misremembering, but like in my mind, okay, this has happened. There is times where I've heard something over and over and I just assumed it was one word, but it was actually written as two separate words. Now, obviously, what is written versus, you know, spoken, like where do we put spaces and where we don't put spaces, that's a whole different thing. But like, it is an interesting fact of the matter that you're recognizing groupings of sounds and sometimes they cross word boundaries, okay, with ALG. So things are kind of like coming into focus and things are kind of blurry. You're not too sure. You think that means this or it could mean this over here. And a great example is in my last video where I literally mixed up some primary colors, okay? Now, I'd heard those colors multiple times, but because I'd always heard them in similar contexts, I kind of just mixed them up all the time, these two colors. I think it's like yellow and orange. I don't know why. Well, I think it's because I've just heard them always in similar contexts, so my brain's not quite sure which is which some of the times, okay? But with Chinese, that's never going to happen with colors. Like, I know what color means what word, like what word means what color, okay? However, the question is this actually method related or is this language related? And this is where I'm starting to think that ALG is actually going to fail really, really bad with languages that are far removed from English. Now, as a native English speaker, okay. Now, before you jump down in the comment section and say, yeah, but it was developed originally for Thai, Evildea, come on, that's nowhere near English, okay. I'll get to that in a moment. Let me explain what I mean, okay. So I did a short experiment over the last few days. I did 2 hours of Japanese comprehensible input just to see. You know, I was curious, like, because Japanese I thought was very far removed from English. Guess what I noticed straight away? A shit ton of English cognates. Oh my god, it is on a total different level to Chinese. Like, there is so many English cognates in Japanese. And not just English. I noticed Esperanto fucking cognates, obviously via the European languages Esperanto is based on. For example, the word for bread, I believe is pronounced pan in Japanese. It's like pano in Esperanto, okay? So there is just so many cognates straight up. So I could potentially use this method to get a pretty good boost in Japanese from the beginning because I'm just going to start hearing all these English and European words, okay? But Chinese does not have that. There is very, very few cognates with Western languages in Chinese. And I feel like if you tried to use this for Chinese, you would be in a world of fucking hurt, okay? Like, it would take you so long to make progress. And I've gone looking for people who are purist ALG users in Chinese, and I haven't found many that have gone beyond the beginner stages. And I think it's because it falls over pretty bad with Chinese, because it is a language that takes away the power of cognates from you, okay? Which is one of the big benefits. Now, not to say that you won't get the other benefits of people pointing and you slowly pick up words of context, but I feel like the time frame needed would be so long. we're talking 5,000 hours potentially, okay? And it's just like you're losing pretty much every single benefit of the ALG method, bar the one of someone pointing at stuff and saying it. And on top of that, the grammar is substantially different. So as opposed to Spanish, where the grammar is not too different from English, even idioms are pretty fucking similar to both English and Esperanto, okay? So it's like you're pretty much just Lego blocking shit in over time and filling out the gaps type of thing. And obviously, like, when I say the grammar's not that different, like, I can recognize now that there's genders and they changed the backs of the words and stuff like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, like, the logical thinking of the language is not too far removed from English and Esperanto. Chinese thinks different. It is pretty far removed when it gets to certain aspects, okay? So you're going to be sitting there with a language that has no cognates, a language that grammatically can be quite different to English, okay? Even though the grammar of the language itself is quite simple in some ways, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and it's going to hurt. Now let's get back to Thai, because Thai is obviously where it all started for ALG. It was developed in Thailand for a Thai school, and that's obviously where it started. So most people are going to be thinking, well, Thai is nothing like English. So I haven't done an experiment with Thai yet. There's actually a big YouTube channel for it, but I did a quick, ask around on ChatGPT, and also, did some searching online. And it turns out 20 to 50% of, modern words within Thai come from English. So you're going to get a shit ton of English cognates, okay? And then 1% from Dutch, because I was a little bit curious about that. And I'm assuming there's more European languages, because if you've already got that much from English, there's probably going to be more European, words in that language, okay? Now, obviously, I've looked into Thai. I read this article that was written by Pablo, who's from Dreaming Spanish. He learned Thai using this method, okay? But I've seen some pretty contradictory stuff about, Thai and the comprehensible input route. I am curious to hear from those who learned Thai using this method down in the comment section, because I know a few of you guys follow me. And I'm also curious to talk about the last aspect of this, okay? And that is accent. One of the big things that a lot of people in the community push, but I haven't seen pushed recently by Dreaming Spanish, although they did back in the day, okay? That is the fact that you should end up with a near-native accent. Now, I've heard some interesting things about Pablo and his accent in Thai, and he learned Thai completely via this method, but I've only heard that from one source. So I would love to hear from my Thai speakers down there what you guys think of his Thai. Okay, so we're going to watch this video from 3 years ago. Now remember, Pablo is the face of Dreaming Spanish. He's a big proponent of ALG, although I believe only Thai is the language that he actually learnt using this method. Japanese he studied using traditional methods and then used ALG style methodology later on, and then obviously he learnt French and other languages.
เป็นภาษาไทยทั้งหมดเลย
ผมพูดภาษาอังกฤษให้แล้วก็ แฟนพูดภาษาไทยให้เรา
อ๋อ เป็นเหมือน cross อะไรเขาเรียกนะ
เรียกว่า cross talk
cross talk ใช่ไหมเดี๋ยวคุณพราโบจะพูดถึงเรื่อง cross talk ด้วยนะคะอ่ะคำถามต่อไปนะคะคุณพราโบคะแล้วเริ่มยังไงเวลาคุณพราโบเริ่มเรียนภาษาไทยเนี่ยอยากรู้ว่าเริ่มเรียนยังไงมีวิธีการเรียนยังไง
ก็เริ่มไปโรงเรียนสอนภาษาไทยแบบพิเศษมากได้เรียนแบบเป็นเด็ก
เรียนแบบเป็นเด็กๆ
ใช่
เรียนรู้เหมือนเรียนเด็ก
ๆแบบฟังพ่อแม่พูดแล้วก็เริ่มเข้าใจนิดหน่อยแล้วก็ได้เข้าใจนิดหน่อยแล้วก็เป็นโรงเรียนแบบนี้มีแค่นี้ฟังภาษาไทยตลอด
Okay, now my purpose of showing this is, it's not my attempt to expose Pablo or anything like that. I don't know. He may be really fucking good. I'm actually asking for feedback. But my purpose here is, I want to know how far you can take this, like this method of ALG, with a language which is far removed from English, okay? Now, Pablo, obviously, he learnt Thai using this method. He has a Thai wife, okay, that he speaks with using this method. So if he's really fucking good at the language and has, basically no accent, then that's kind of proof, right? Then that's proof that the method works really, really well, even for a language that's far removed, even though it has a lot of cognates from what I've researched so far. Then again, those numbers could be wrong. Now, I have never seen anyone try this with a language which, like Chinese, to an advanced level. That is what I am most fascinated about. And this is why in my previous video I said, in the future, one day, I hope to do this with a language which has basically no English influence. Okay, so maybe an Aboriginal language in Australia, or, you know, Cherokee. Then again, I don't know, maybe Cherokee's got a lot of influence from English, but the hard part is obviously also trying to find content in the language, but a language that has very little influence so that we can see hours-wise what it would actually take. I suspect it would take 5,000 plus hours to get to even a reasonable level in the language. But this is just something I wanted to present and like my thoughts as of recently following this. And again, my whole point behind these videos is not to shit on let me express that again, okay? Is not to shit on ALG or any other method out there, is to provide people who come to me wanting advice about different things, what works and what doesn't for what situations and what type of person, okay? So if I told you today, look, we've done a test, we know it takes 5,000 hours to learn Chinese to an intermediate level using ALG, and if you said, yeah, I'm cool with that, I'd be like, okay, well then go ahead, my man. I want you to succeed. I want you to reach your goals, okay? But I want you to also be aware of what's required. So that's the type of person I am, and that's why I'm raising this discussion and also providing you guys some insight. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know down in the comment section your thoughts, specifically interested in Thai learners who have used ALG, what they think also about Pablo here, also natives, and also anyone who's seen someone get to a high level in a language like Chinese using this method. And I'll see you all in the next video. And if you're not there, well, my friends, I'm going to lock you up in a room and we're going to do an experiment. And trust me, it's going to take a while.